The wind outside howled through the cracks of the old cargo shelter. Mark sat alone in his dimly lit cabin, sipping cold coffee and listening to the storm outside. He hadn't had a visitor in 6 weeks not since he landed on this forgotten moon to escape the noise of the galaxy. But tonight felt different. Too quiet. Too still. Then came a knock. Soft, gentle, almost scared. Mark froze, his hand still holding the cup in midair. Another knock, slightly louder this time, echoed through the thick metal door. He grabbed his blaster just in case and stepped toward the entrance. The sensor flickered, showing a tiny figure standing in the cold outside. He pressed the button. The door hissed open, and there she was, a girl, maybe 5 feet tall, barefoot on the frozen ground. Her skin was pale lavender, and her eyes, huge and glowing, were filled with fear. She wore torn fabric that barely covered her thin frame. Her hands were folded in front of her chest like she was waiting for punishment. Before he could speak, she whispered, her voice trembling, "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet." Mark stared at her, unsure what to say. She lowered her head. "Please. Just let me stay the night." Something in her voice made him lower the blaster. She wasn't dangerous. She was scared, freezing, and desperate. "Get inside," he muttered, stepping back. She didn't move until he nodded again, only then did she step in, moving slowly as if expecting to be hit. The door closed behind her. Locking out the storm, Mark grabbed a towel and handed it to her. She took it without a word, wiping her feet, her hands, her face. Then she knelt down in the corner, not speaking, not looking at anything. "You hungry?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She nodded once. Mark heated a protein pack and placed it in front of her. She didn't grab it like a starving thief. Instead, she waited, looking at him like she was asking for permission. He frowned. "You can eat." Only then did she take the pack and slowly eat, careful not to make any noise. Each bite looked like heaven to her, like she hadn't tasted real food in days. Maybe longer. Mark sat across from her, watching. She finished the food and whispered, "Thank you, Master." That word made him flinch. "Don't call me that," he said quietly. She blinked, confused, but that's what I'm supposed to say. "No, not here," Mark replied. "Just call me Mark." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Mark." There was silence for a while. Mark leaned back and looked at the girl more closely. She had scars, faint ones running down her arms and the side of her neck, old wounds, healed but never forgotten. "You got a name?" he asked. She shook her head. "I was never given one." That hit him harder than he expected. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Well, that's gonna change," he said. "How about Aya?" She looked up, surprised. "Aya," she whispered, like it was the first word she ever owned. She smiled, just a little, and Mark saw something in her eyes. Hope, maybe. "All right, Aya," he said. "You can stay here tonight, but we'll talk more in the morning." She nodded and curled up in the corner again. "Bed's over there," he pointed. She shook her head quickly. "I'll stay here. It's safer." Safer. What kind of life had she come from? Mark didn't press. He dimmed the lights and lay down in his bed. But he didn't sleep. He listened to the wind and the breathing of the quiet alien girl in the corner. Something wasn't right. She wasn't just a runaway or a lost traveler. Someone had hurt her, trained her, used her, and whoever it was might come looking for her. Mark turned over and stared at the ceiling. He had promised himself a quiet life away from the galaxy. But now, with one knock at midnight, everything had changed, and deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Mark awoke before the sun, not because of noise, but because of silence. He looked over at the bed across the room, still perfectly made. The girl hadn't touched it. Instead, She sat on the cold floor near the door, knees pulled to her chest, wide. Awake, her lavender skin looked even paler in the early light. She didn't move until she noticed him watching. Then she quickly lowered her gaze and whispered, "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb." "You didn't," Mark said, getting up and stretching. "You just sat there all night." She nodded once. "I didn't want to. Make mistakes? Mistakes." Mark repeated. She hesitated, then whispered, "Last time I touched a bed. I was punished." His chest tightened. There were more scars than he'd seen. Scars not just on her body, but deep inside her mind. He walked over and sat a few feet away. "You're safe here, Aya," he said softly. "No one's going to." "Hurt you for using a bed." She looked confused again, like she didn't know if she could trust his words. After a moment, she whispered, "Do you mean that?" Mark nodded. "I mean every word." Aya blinked slowly, then looked toward the bed. But she didn't move. Instead, she changed the subject. "Do you need me to start cleaning?" Mark gave a tired laugh. "Not right now," he said. "But if you want something to do, come eat breakfast with me." She stood carefully. Walking behind him like a silent shadow, Mark noticed the way she always stayed 2 steps behind, never beside him. It made his skin crawl. What kind of life had trained her to act this way? They sat together at the small metal table. Mark poured her some warm synth milk and passed her a ration bar. She hesitated, then bit into it quietly, eyes flicking up to him like she was watching for signs of anger. "You always this quiet?" he asked, trying to keep the mood light. "I was taught to be," she replied, chewing slowly. "Noise means attention, and attention means danger." Mark didn't know how to answer that. Instead, he asked, "What do you remember before this?" Aya looked down at the table. "There was a cage," she said. "It was small, dark, always moving. Sometimes we were taken out and shown to others, like things to sell. I ran when their ship crashed. But I don't know how far I came." Mark felt like someone had punched him in the chest. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand on hers. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. "I'm glad you made it here," he said. Her lip trembled, but she nodded. Later that afternoon, Mark noticed her organizing tools in his workshop. She wasn't just cleaning, she was memorizing every piece, every function. Aya didn't ask questions, but she was clearly smart. "Do you want to learn how this works?" he asked, showing her a welding torch. She nodded quickly. Mark handed it over and began explaining the basics. Her eyes lit up not with fear this time, but with curiosity. It was the first real light he'd seen in her since she arrived. By evening, she had learned how to weld 2 pieces of metal and even helped fix a broken pipe. Mark watched her from a distance as she cleaned the soot off her hands and smiled at her small success. But that night, she again went to sleep near the door, this time lying on a thin blanket with her back to the room. Mark approached carefully, holding a pillow. "You sure you don't want to use the bed?" he asked. "I want to," she said quietly. "But I'm scared I'll forget where I came from if I get too comfortable." Mark sat beside her and thought about her words. "I don't want you to forget," he said, "but I do want you to feel safe enough to heal." Aya looked at him, her glowing eyes soft. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "Then let's figure it out together," he replied. He handed her the pillow, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate to take it. That night, she fell asleep faster. No screams, no panic, just slow breathing, calm and steady. Mark didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. This girl had survived the worst, and now she deserved more than just a place. On the floor, she deserved a chance to be someone again. Not a servant, not a slave, but Aya. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting a golden light across the metal walls. Mark stood in the kitchen. Flipping synthetic pancakes on a hot plate, behind him, Aya quietly folded a towel again and again until the edges were perfectly aligned. She wasn't told to, she just did it. "Hey," Mark said gently. "You don't have to keep busy every second." Aya looked up like she had been caught doing something wrong. Her hands froze mid-fold. "I just thought it would help," she said in a quiet voice. Mark sighed, setting the plate on the table. "It's not wrong to rest," he said. "Especially now. You're not a tool, Aya." She blinked at the name. It still felt strange to her, like a borrowed word. He had given it to her just a day ago, but she still hadn't accepted it fully. Like it didn't belong to her. "I don't remember ever having one," she whispered as she sat down to eat. "No one ever called me anything. That's not right," Mark said, pouring her some tea. "A name isn't just a word. It's who you are." "Aya means color of life in my old language." Aya tilted her head, surprised. "I thought it was just a sound." Mark smiled. "No, it's yours now." She touched her chest lightly. "Aya," she repeated. "Color of life." After breakfast, they stepped outside. The world beyond was barren, just miles of orange desert and wind-blown cliffs. But to Aya, it looked wide and terrifying. "You've never been outside like this, have you?" Mark asked. She shook her head. "I've only seen stars through glass." They walked slowly together toward the edge of a dried riverbed. Aya watched every movement, every bird that flew past, every breeze that moved her hair. To her, it was all new. Suddenly, she stopped walking. "Something's wrong," she said. Voice shaking, Mark turned, hand reaching for his blaster. "What do you mean?" Aya pointed toward the sky. A blinking red dot hovered far above them, like a faint star. "It's not natural," she whispered. "They used to send those to track the others." Mark squinted at the glimmering light. A low hum reached his ears, the kind that only came from surveillance drones. He pulled Aya behind a nearby rock. "Stay low," he said, voice now sharp and calm. Aya crouched, her breathing fast. "I thought I escaped," she whispered. "I really thought I got away." Mark took out an old scanner and tuned it to the drone's frequency. His face darkened as the signal came through. It wasn't just any drone, it belonged to a private slaver network. "They found you," Mark said quietly. "But how?" Aya hesitated, then reached up and touched the back of her neck. "There might be a tag," she said softly. "I never knew for sure, but it always felt warm." Mark looked closer and saw it. A tiny silver disc, almost invisible under her hair. "We have to remove it," he said. Now back inside the cabin, Aya sat in the chair, clutching a pillow. Mark brought out his medkit, a heated scalpel and a bottle of Sprainum. "This will sting," he warned. "I can take it." She replied, not even blinking. He numbed the area and sliced carefully, removing the chip with surgical precision the second it left her skin. It began blinking faster. Mark dropped it in a containment jar and crushed it under a heavy wrench. The blinking stopped. Aya exhaled deeply, as if something heavy had been lifted from her soul. "It's gone," she whispered, touching the small bandage on her neck. "I'm really free now." Mark looked at her seriously. "You were already free the moment you walked through that door. But now they know we're here." Aya's eyes widened in fear. "They'll come for me, then we won't be here when they do," Mark said, already packing supplies. "I have an old ship." He added, "She's rusty, but she still flies." Aya stood slowly, staring at him. "You're going to help me escape again?" Mark looked at her. "I'm not helping you escape," he said. "I'm helping you start over." She swallowed hard and gave a small nod. Then, with the softest voice, she said, "Thank you, Mark. No more master, right?" He teased. Aya smiled, truly smiled for the first time. "Never again," she whispered. "My name is Aya." *, the engine room of Mark's old star freighter groaned with age. Dust floated in the stale air, lit by flickering yellow lights. Mark wiped sweat from his brow as he tightened a valve. Aya stood quietly beside him. Holding tools without being asked, she had stopped flinching every time a pipe hissed. "I thought you said this ship was rusty," she said softly. Mark grinned. "She is," he replied, "but she's all we've got." Aya looked around, taking in the metal walls, the blinking buttons, the wires that crawled like vines. To her, it felt like a new kind of cage butt. This one had a door they controlled. Then a loud ping echoed from the ship's internal scanner. Mark froze. He ran to the console and looked at the screen. A red light was blinking too fast. Aya stepped beside him. "What is it?" He tapped the display, his expression tightening. "Signal burst," he muttered. "High-powered, narrow beam." Aya didn't understand the words, but she understood the fear in his voice. "That thing you removed from me," she whispered. "Was it calling them?" Mark nodded slowly. "I think it sent out a location ping right before I crushed it." Just one burst, but it might have been enough. Aya's hands trembled. "They'll send hunters," she said. "Fast ones." Mark looked at her. "Then we have to leave tonight." They rushed to load supplies into the ship. Water packs, protein rations, tools, and blankets. Mark strapped in a backup power cell and overrode the freighter's startup sequence. Aya moved without hesitation now, helping like a real crew member, but inside, fear clung to her. Not for herself, but for Mark. He was putting himself in danger. Because of her, no one had ever done that before. As the ship powered up, the floor shook gently. The control lights turned green one by one. Mark sat in the pilot chair and gestured to the seat beside him. Aya hesitated only for a second before taking it. "This thing gonna hold together?" she asked. Mark smirked. "Let's hope," with a low growl. The ship rose into the air and blasted out of the desert canyon. Stars filled the window like diamonds in black silk. Aya leaned back, watching the sky shift from orange to endless. Space, for the first time in her life, she wasn't being taken, she was leaving by choice. But the peace didn't last long. A sudden beep came from the rear sensors. "Contact," Mark muttered, eyes narrowing. Small ship, fast and closing. Aya's breath caught in her throat. "It's him," she whispered, Rollon. Mark didn't ask how she knew. Some instincts don't lie. "I've got one trick up my sleeve," Mark said, punching a series of commands into the panel. "Old smuggler trick, mask our signature, and dump a decoy signal." A few tense seconds passed. The enemy ship closed the distance, then suddenly turned away. Chasing the fake signal, Aya let out a shaky breath. "You fooled him? Only for now," Mark said, voice grim. "He'll search the nearby systems, and he'll come back smarter. We need to disappear for real." Aya looked at him. "Where can we go?" "There is a System 3 jumps from here," Mark said. "Zerafor. They call it the free zone. No slavers. No hunters. They don't recognize slave tags or ownership papers." Aya nodded slowly. "What happens when we get there?" "You register as free," he said. "They give you protection and rights, your own identity." Aya stared out the window. "What if I don't know how to live free?" Mark turned to her. "Then we figure it out together." They entered hyperspace. The stars stretching into long trails. Aya pressed her fingers against the glass. It felt like flying through a dream. Hours passed, and Mark set the ship to auto course. He went to check the storage bay. Aya stayed behind, staring at the navigation map. Then another ping, but this one was weaker, slower, like a whisper through the void. She leaned forward, heart racing. A new blip appeared on the screen, a smaller ship, distant, but following the same path. Mark returned and saw her staring at the console. "What is it?" Aya pointed. "I think he's still following." Mark stared at the slow-moving dot. "He must have tagged our heat trail," he muttered. "Rollon's not giving up. Aya's voice cracked. He won't stop until he owns me again, Mark. Turned to her. He won't own anything again, Aya, he said firmly. Not as long as I breathe. Aya looked at him, tears forming in her glowing eyes. No one had ever promised to protect her before, not without owning her. But Mark wasn't her owner. He was her shield, her friend. Outside the ship, space was silent. But inside, a storm was building. The hunter was coming. And next time, he wouldn't fall for tricks. The room was filled with glass. Tubes of light shimmered down on figures frozen in Timalian women sealed in transparent pods. Some sleeping, some unconscious, some simply. Broken Roland Core stood in the center of the display chamber. His long black coat dragged across the smooth floor as he walked past each pod. He stopped at one that used to be AA's. It was empty now, cracked along the side where she had escaped. She was the best in the lot, he whispered coldly, quiet, obedient. Rare species, replaceable, behind him. A lizard-faced assistant bowed nervously. Tracking beacon was disabled, but not before it pinged a small outer moon. Then what are you still doing here? Rowland growled. Find the girl and bring me the man who took her. The assistant nodded quickly and scurried away. Ryland turned back to the cracked pod, his hand resting against the smooth surface. I trained you better than this. Little star, he said, you don't run from me, far across space. Mark's freighter dropped out of hyperspace near Zerafor. The planet was green and blue, wrapped in thick rings and blinking satellites. Aya stared at it through the glass. It didn't feel real. Freedom was something others had, not her. Mark guided the ship toward a border dock station. As they approached, a transmission came through. State your name, ship class, and reason for entry. Mark responded calmly. Names: Mark Dawson, cargo hauler, requesting entry for refugee protection. There was a pause, then a reply. Approved docking bay 6, inside the station. Things looked cleaner, brighter, less dangerous. Aya stayed close to Mark, her eyes scanning everything. For the first time, no one stared at her like an object. No one reached to touch her or whispered bids into a cum. A woman in a black uniform greeted them. You're requesting registration for the girl. She asked Mark. No, Aya interrupted, her voice trembling. I want to register myself. The officer looked surprised, then smiled. Very well. They led Aya to a small room where she gave a voice sample, retinal scan, and thumbprint. When asked for her name, she stood taller and said clearly, Aya. A few minutes later, she held a small ID card with her picture, a serial number, and a simple title. Free being. She stared at it in awe. This is mine. Mark nodded. It's yours. But peace didn't last that night. As they rested in a rented capsule room, a silent alarm on the ship activated. Mark checked the feed. His motion sensors had picked up an intruder. Only one, but it wasn't a thief. It was Raylon Core. He stood in the cargo bay, stroking the walls like they were old friends. Then he looked up at the nearest security camera and smiled. I'm here, little girl. He whispered. Come home. Mark's fists clenched. He found us. Aya backed away from the screen, her breathing shallow. Do we run again? She asked, voice shaking. Mark shook his head. No more running. He came alone. He wants to scare us into surrendering. Aya stared at the screen. Her past stood right there, waiting, but so did her new future, just outside the station. Walls, she turned to Mark. I want to face him. Mark blinked. Surprised? You sure? I don't want to hide anymore, she said, voice firm. If I keep running, he'll never stop. Mark nodded slowly. Then we fight. They left the station and returned to the ship quietly. Aya moved like a shadow, heart pounding. Mark handed her a shock baton and whispered instructions. He thinks you'll be scared. He said, show him he's wrong. Inside the ship, Rollin waited calmly. He turned when the door hissed open. "Well," he said, smiling, "you've returned to your place." Aya stepped forward. "No," she said. "I've come to end it." Rollin raised a brow. "You think you're free?" He laughed. "You are what I made you." "No," Aya said again. Her voice steady. "You made a servant, but Mark showed me I'm a person." Then she lunged. Faster than Rollin expected, the baton struck his arm, sending a shock through his body. He roared in pain and grabbed her throat. But before he could squeeze, Mark appeared from behind and slammed a wrench into Rollin's ribs. Rollin stumbled back, coughing. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But Aya didn't stop. She pressed the baton to his chest and lit him up again. He collapsed to the floor. Twitching, defeated, Mark stepped forward and said, "You're done hunting women." They called the station guards, who took Raylon into custody. His crimes were broadcast across 3 systems, and Aya's name was cleared that night. Aya sat on the deck of the ship with Mark, staring at the stars. "I was scared," she said softly, "but not of him." "Of what then?" Mark asked. "Of what comes next," she whispered. "I've never had a future before." Mark smiled. "Well," he said, "you've got one now." The courtroom on Zerafor wasn't made of polished marble or gold. It was built with steel and truth. Every wall was lined with cameras, not paintings. This was justice in the free zones, raw, public, and fast. Aya stood at the center, her shoulders back, her jaw tight. She wore no chains, no slave tags, no collar. Just a simple blue tunic and her new ID badge clipped to her chest, free being a cross. The room Rollin Core sat in a force field cell. His eyes scanned her with cold calculation. "You look strange, standing on your feet," he said with a cruel smile. "You used to crawl so well." Mark stepped forward, fists clenched, but Aya placed a hand on his arm. "No," she said calmly. "He wants to pull me back. I won't let him." The judge, a tall insectoid creature named Varzik, clicked his mandibles and called the court to order. "Testimony begins now." Aya stepped forward, took a breath, and spoke. "I was taken from my home world when I was very young. I don't remember the sky or the scent of the wind. I only remember the cages." The room went silent. "Rollin bought me at an auction," she continued. "He didn't speak to me like a person, just a product. I was trained to serve, to smile, to never speak unless spoken to." She looked straight at him. "I never said no. Not because I agreed, but because I was too afraid." Rollin laughed quietly behind his glass shield. Aya didn't stop. "But fear isn't forever," she said. "I met someone who taught me that I could choose, that I didn't have to be what you made me." Mark's eyes misted over, but he said nothing. This was Aya's fight now. The judge turned to Rollin. "Do you deny these claims?" Raylon sneered. "She was bought legally." He said, "I paid for her training, her care, her silence. She broke contract and attacked me. I was only reclaiming property." The room buzzed with quiet outrage, but Aya stood firm. "I'm not property," she said, "and your laws don't apply here." Judge Varzak leaned forward. "Zerafor recognizes no ownership of sentient beings. Your defense is invalid," Raylon snarled, slamming a fist against the force field. "I will find others," he growled. "There are still systems where my kind rule." Aya stepped closer to the shield, her eyes burning bright. "Then I'll keep speaking," she said. "I'll tell others what you did, who you are." Rollin laughed again, but his face twitched for the first time. Aya saw fear in him, not for his life, but for his secrets. After hours of evidence, testimonies, and footage recovered from Mark's ship, the verdict came. Rollin Core, Judge Varzak said, "You are hereby declared guilty of illegal trafficking, forced servitude, and biological cruelty. Sentence: Permanent exile to the penal asteroid Diatro 7. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps. Aya watched as guards escorted Roland out, his threats echoing behind him. "You'll regret this. Girl, my kind always return." But she didn't flinch. Not this time. Later that evening, Aya and Mark returned to the freighter. The stars blinked above them like thousands of tiny witnesses. "You did it," Mark said. Softly, handing her a cup of warm brew. "You really did it." Aya stared at the drink, her hands trembling not from fear, but from release. "I didn't think I could," she whispered. "I thought I'd always be his shadow." "You're not," Mark said, sitting beside her. "You stepped into the light." She looked at him, eyes still wet. "Why did you help me?" Mark chuckled softly. "I didn't do it for reward," he said. "I did it because I saw someone who didn't deserve what she got." Aya smiled, then looked up at the stars. "They still scare me sometimes," she said. "So many stars, so many people like him out there." "Yeah," Mark nodded. "But now there's you, too. You'll make it better." Aya stood up and looked around the ship. "This ship saved me," she said. "But I want to do more than just survive," Mark raised a brow. "Like what?" "I want to help others like me," she said. "Girls who are still in cages, still afraid. I know how they think, I know how they hide." Mark looked at her, really looked. She was no longer just a survivor, she was becoming something more, a protector, a voice, a fighter. "Well," he said, standing up beside her, "I guess we've got work to do." Aya nodded. "Yes," she said with a new strength in her voice. "Let's fight back." The ship flew low over a green valley on the edge of a quiet moon. Below were trees, lakes, and simple homes made of stone and metal. No weapons, no fences, no cages, just peace. Mark guided the freighter gently toward a landing pad surrounded by flowers. Beside him, Aya sat in the co-pilot's chair, hands steady on the controls. She no longer watched the sky with fear. Now she watched it with purpose. As the engines powered down, the hatch opened with a soft hiss. Warm air flowed. Inside, scented with herbs and sunlight, Aya stepped out and looked around, blinking against the brightness. "This is the place?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet hope. Mark nodded. "Refuge Station 7. He said, "Built by survivors, for survivors." A small group of people walked toward them, different species. Different colors, different eyes, but all had the same look. Freedom hard won. One woman, tall and covered in glowing tattoos, stepped forward and smiled. "You must be Aya," she said. "We've heard of what you did." Aya hesitated, unsure how to respond. Mark gently touched her shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered. "Just be you." Aya nodded and stepped forward. "I want to help," she said. "I want to teach others what it means to be free." The woman smiled wider. "Then you're exactly who we need." Over the next few weeks, Aya learned more than she ever thought possible. She studied law, languages, healing, and survival. She trained with ex-captains and freed diplomats, and every night, she returned to the little cabin she now shared with Mark. They built a garden outside, small but full of life. Mark grew vegetables, and Aya painted stones with symbols she remembered from childhood. They didn't speak much about the past anymore, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controlled them. One evening, while watering the garden, Aya found a child sitting by the gate, a small alien girl with wide eyes and a collar around her neck. She was silent, trembling, and barefoot. Aya knelt down slowly and whispered, "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet." The girl looked up in shock. Aya reached out her hand, her voice soft. "You don't have to say that anymore." Tears filled the child's eyes. Mark appeared behind them, carrying a blanket. He wrapped it around the girl and smiled. "You're safe now," he said. That night, Aya sat by the fire, holding the child in her arms. She was just like me, she whispered. I never thought I'd be the one saying those words. Mark placed a warm drink beside her. You became more than you ever thought possible, he said. You're not the girl who knocked on my door anymore? Aya looked into the flames. No, she said. I'm not. I'm someone new. She turned to Mark, her eyes glowing gently. You saved me, she said. But you never made me feel owned. Mark smiled softly. You weren't mine to own. He said, you were always yours. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of meaning. The stars began to shine above, one by one, and in that soft starlight, the future opened wide in the weeks that followed. Aya helped open a new shelter for rescued survivors. She taught them how to breathe again, how to sleep without fear, how to smile without permission. And when they asked her how she escaped, she simply said, I knocked on the right door one day. As she walked through the garden, she and Mark built together. A little girl ran up to her. She tugged on Aya's tunic and asked, Are you a hero? Aya knelt down, smiling. No, she said, I'm just someone who didn't stop. The girl beamed. I want to be like you. Aya hugged her gently. Then never forget this, she said. You are not property, not a pet, not a price. You are a person and no one can take that from you. From the moment she had whispered, I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet, her story had changed, and now? She was the one changing stories for others, because sometimes all it takes is one open door and one kind voice to rewrite a life.